Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. My guest today is a longtime friend, Niels Pasternak. Niels, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So a little backstory of who you are and why I had you on. You are a special education teacher in Eugene in the life skills program, also a chair of the OEA Special Education Union. Thank you so much for talking to us today.
It's actually a special education committee for OEA.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. So we have a lot to talk about. One of the things that I wanted to discuss was the challenges of distance learning. You had reached out to me and talked about coming on the show. Even, pre-COVID, you wanted to talk about some of the needs of special education students and, and your passion for that, the work you do with that. So let's start off talking about how you got into it. What motivated you to want to get into special education teaching and whatnot? So tell me a little bit about that. Graduated from U of O and then got into teaching and tell me how that started.
Well, how far you want to go back? Because that's a long, when I look at my life experiences, socializing and being with people who are differently able, it really started when I was a young child. I don't know if you want to go back that far or just start from the college days or.
I think you can touch on it. Let's go ahead and touch on that because the motivation I think is important.
All right. Well, my mother had a disability. She had epilepsy and she actually passed away when I was 2 years old and had a seizure, and she didn't have proper precautions in place or protocols. So I was home alone with her and she just fell the wrong way and died. So, you don't really remember that being a 2-year-old, but looking back on it all these years later, I realized, maybe if she would have had a good IEP team or a special ed 504 plan or some of the things we do now, then she wouldn't have been in that predicament for that to happen. Then, when I was living in New York, I was born in New York, we had a neighbor who was had Down syndrome and intellectual disability. And he was like our adopted uncle. We called him Uncle Jerry. And so we would hang out with Uncle Jerry, sometimes. And then when I moved out from New York, I lived in Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in California before North Bend, Coos Bay, and finally Eugene. But every year, through my childhood for several years, he would send me a birthday card and it would just have the scribble with you could make out the U and the Jerry, and he would write his name in cursive and that would be all he would say because he couldn't write very well. But I would get a birthday card from Uncle Jerry, and I didn't really appreciate it properly as a little kid, but looking back on it now, you appreciate these things more.
Right.
And then, when I moved to North Bend, Coos Bay, there was this kid named Bruce who was, he had a pretty significant intellectual disability, and he was in my elementary school class. And every now and then Bruce would get really upset and he'd do things like roar and jump up on the desk or throw desks. And I used to go home and complain to my parents, why does Bruce have to be in my class? He's disruptive and I don't like it. And, so fast forward, to high school, and Bruce is in high school and he was in a self-contained life skills program by then. And I was a peer tutor my senior year in the life skills program. And I actually got kicked out from being a peer tutor because I was playing, they had a soft football and Bruce liked to play catch, and I was playing catch with him in the classroom, and I didn't realize that would piss off the teacher a lot. And then so the teacher came in and saw me doing that. She's like, get out of here. You can never peer tutor again. So then, fast forward to college, I went to U of O. I got my degree in psychology because I'm really interested in how people think and just getting to know people and seeing how you can help in that field. And so I got my undergrad in psychology, and I did a year of a mix of family human services and graduate psychology and a little bit of pharmacology. In graduate school, I took some classes in those areas, mostly in counseling, graduate level counseling, for about a year. And I realized that I started having hesitations, I didn't really know if I wanted to be a counselor. I don't think I would have been the greatest counselor because, you're mostly supposed to listen, and I don't know that I'd be able to stop myself from giving people advice, but that's kind of a no-no to give direct advice in counseling. Right. So I was working in childcare centers. I worked at a nonprofit, Security First at the time, and I had a class of I was getting minimum wage, $8 an hour, and I was the only adult managing a class of 15 kids. And the kids were ages 5 to like 15 or 5 to 13, like all ages. And it was just like a madhouse because I'm around here and there's no curriculum. You're just kind of this daycare center. So you're just trying to help them stay occupied in healthy ways. And the only time they'd send in a second person to help is I had one kid I had to go into the back with and supervise while he did insulin shots for himself. And then I asked for a raise for a couple years and they wouldn't give me a raise. So I'm working for $8 an hour for a couple years. And then I got on with Lane ESD as an instructional assistant. One time a sub came through and her name was Linda and she's like, oh, you know, you should be working for Lane ESD. It gives you benefits and pays like $4 an hour more. And I said, okay, I'll give that a try.
Now, what's Lane ESD?
It's the Lane Education Services District. So we have education services districts all throughout the state of Oregon for the different regions. And Lane ESD serves all of Lane County and they provide a lot of special instructional services. In our area, all the life skills programs in like the high school and middle school, I believe pretty much are run by Lane ESD. There was a period when they ran all the life skills programs, but then some of the districts took back over some of them. So I guess like Willamette Life Skills, Bethel took that back. So that one's district operated, but Lane ESD at one time operated all the life skills programs and now they operate just most of them, I would say, or about half of them.
Right.
And so I was working with people with moderate to severe impacts from their exceptionalities. And they had a special position for me because they're short on subs all the time. They made me an at-large sub. So you work, guaranteed work 30 hours minimum a week, but you go whatever places they want you to go.
Right.
And so by doing that for 3 years, I worked in like 15 different programs. And I got married in 2006. And that was around the start of my time with Lane ESD. And then after 2 or 3 years of that, my wife says, you know, you ought to run one of those programs. You should go back and get your master's in special ed. And I said, yeah, I think I should. Because, you know, I was seeing people run programs and I'm like, I could totally do this. And I had ideas for improvement. But when you're a instructional assistant, and especially if you're an at-large sub and you're just going where they send you, you don't get to have a lot of input about how to improve the program. So there was things I saw that I always wondered, why are we doing this? Or this can't be that good for this kid. Like, why am I I have a kid, I'm just supposed to walk him in circles, basically around the school all day and then take him to the bathroom every hour. And then he had like a work system with poker chips and all he'd do is you open the container of poker chips and it had a little slot in the top and you dump it out on the mat and he would sit there on the carpet and like slobber every poker chip in his mouth and then put it through the slot. And I'm like, you know, what am I doing here? But
right.
So then I went back to school and I went to Pacific University and they have a really good program if you want to be a teacher. There's a satellite campus here in Eugene. And I like their program a lot because they have a paid internship as a part of that program. So you go to school for 2 years, but for most of the time they placed you in an actual job and you work as an intern and you get paid 3/4 of a teacher's salary and you have a mentor. So I got placed at my current site. I haven't left in 14 years from that internship placement. And you get to work directly with the kids as you're learning about how to work more effectively with people, you know, with exceptionalities. And I was working with a guy who had stayed in high school till he was 20. He was in his last year of services because the way it works in life skills is you get educational services until you're 21. Like 18 to 21 is usually transition services. So you go to a transition program where they connect you with, you know, developmental disability service and the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation Services and supported employment opportunities and those kind of things to get you ready for adult life with the supports that you need. So, you know, I was just doing a lot of that kind of work but this kid had stayed in high school and he had been in a learning center, which is like for kids with more mild disabilities, but he had been in a car wreck and been in a coma and had lost his ability to talk and to move. And he was in a wheelchair and he had a big behavior file and it said the kid would throw tantrums. And I got to working with him and I realized he's throwing tantrums because he understands everything that people say and people are talking to him and treating him like he doesn't understand anything. So like in that 1 year of working with him, we got him a power wheelchair. I taught him how to drive one. He used to give me a run for the money. He would laugh at me and drive it off curbs and do donuts in the middle of the street, like the intersection. Like that's part of the job, life skills sometimes. So I'm literally like, picture me in the middle of a street, red light turning green, and I got a kid just laughing, driving his power wheelchair in circles. And we got him like these mesh bags that attach to your finger because he couldn't swallow properly, but he really liked regular food. So you get these mesh bags that clip, and you can put any kind of food in. The holes in the bag are really, really small, so you can get the flavor and slowly dissolve things, in the mesh bag. So the mission was drive your power wheelchair to Safeway. We'll find some of the food you want for your mesh bag, and then let's drive back and we'll have some of that. And then he also was learning a computer to talk for the first time. And he was also staying at this really, this like old folks home called South Hills Rehabilitation Center. And they were also not treating him really well. Like he wouldn't get out of bed till noon. Sometimes I did visits to his group, to that old folks rehabilitation center. They would do things like have the duck game on, but then park him with his chair facing the wall. And this was like 14 years ago. I don't know. They might be much better now, but
sure.
We filed complaints against them and got them moved out of there. There's actually a couple students that we had filed complaints on their behalf and got them moved into proper group homes with like one or two other people, and not living in the old folks home and getting treated like, they didn't understand anything. But in 1 year we had an OGCOM system. So that's basically a computer people used to talk. We got him a power wheelchair. We got him moved out of the group home that wasn't really taking care of him properly into a better home. And he got a job, and he still delivers packages in his power wheelchair today. Nice. And that was all in his last year of services. He would have aged out and not got any of those things. And I was documenting and recording and describing this experience I was having with him and the other students during my intern year, and talking about it a lot in my classes at Pacific. And I got to be the keynote speaker. I was 4.0 student in Pacific. And when we did the graduation up in Forest Grove, I was the only speaker for like a class of almost 200 graduate students.
Wow.
It's also funny because of the work I did with him.
Yeah, so this is a big reason that I wanted to have you on. You've got an obvious passion for it and personal experience in it. And so thanks for sharing that. And I wanted to touch on a lot of stuff today. So we got a lot to go over. So we're just going to get right into it. One of the biggest things in this current situation with the coronavirus is distance learning. 4J, and I think basically most of the schools in our area have gone to 100% online, at least to start out, I think for the entire school year. Is that true?
No, they've only called it for fall term, and they're going to reevaluate a hybrid model for winter term and spring term is what they're saying.
So one of the things, distance learning for students with special needs is definitely a challenge. And unfortunately, this is another example of where we were kind of asleep at the wheel, because it's almost like it's too late to do too much. What is it that you would like to speak on as the real challenges of distance learning for special needs students?
I really feel like, coming from a life skills perspective, I have a lot of students that can't really benefit in a significant way from distance learning only. And like when you're doing physical therapy with student, or you're doing tube feeding, or, you're doing partial physical assistance, or we're training kids in the community to navigate the community safely, or to stop at crosswalks, or to be able to purchase something at a store, or sometimes working with agoraphobia and just being able to enter a store without like having a panic attack, and cooking and just vocational training. So much of what I do cannot be really replicated on distance learning. And then like with a lot of my students who are more severely impacted, if they are distance learning from home, it's like their parents are therefore not able to work, or they need full-time care. So
right.
And I know that Developmental Disability Services has been sending personal support workers into families' houses this whole time to help with the support needs, because it's necessary service. It's just as necessary as working in a grocery store, is helping someone if someone needs help and they have disabilities and they need help to whether it's maintain their home, or manage their finances, or go to a store, or get groceries, or cook a meal. If they don't have that support, we can't just let people starve. So
right. Yeah, it's difficult because, now, and this is a different issue altogether, but now with the decimation to the economy from COVID, there's going to be a lack of tax revenue that pays for a lot of the services that help. One of the things we had talked about off air is that you can speak on this more, but you had talked about potentially having kind of a bridge between the educators and the service workers. Because what did you call them?
They're called PSWs. They're personal support workers. And Yeah, I mean, there's always kind of been a bridge. Like I work with usually 6 or 7 instructional assistants in the regular school year. And some of them are also personal support workers through DDS. And so the families can access direct support for non-school hours through DDS. And there's like an assessment they do with a bunch of questions called a K plan. And based on the answers to those questions, they come up with a number of hours that a person with disabilities needs support for in a month, and then those hours can be filled by DDS. So what I'm wondering, you know, and we're looking at where our instructional assistants might get hours cut. Like if you were working 7.5 hours with all different students doing the regular duties of life skills, and then we go distance learning, then the work for those 7 instructional assistants might be half or even less. Like it's going to be hard to fill the hours if we're not providing physical therapy or basic, you know, the hygiene help or other things like that. So I'm wondering, like, how are we going to keep people, if we're doing this in the fall or maybe even the winter, and we're cutting people's hours to where they can't make enough money to survive, you know, working in public education, then what are we going to do for them? Like, are they going to all switch over to DDS? And then even if that happens, I mean, do we have school administration that's going to work with DDS to help support making sure all the families that need support get it? Because there's usually lines and delays, and there's not always, you know, bureaucracy slows things down, and having more administration sometimes in a bureaucracy or more people handling requests helps speed it back up.
Right. And that's, I mean, this is like I touched on before about how it's like we were all asleep at the wheel because, you know, it might be too late to fix this so fast. You know, one of the other issues we had talked about that we wanted to at least address was the need for Wi-Fi, not only for, you know, special needs students, but for all students. But talk a little bit about what has been in place in different parts of the area as far as Wi-Fi for families that may not be able to afford it. I know that in some areas they've done remote hotspots, which is not a good approach because it's just putting Wi-Fi hotspots like in a parking lot of a church or a school. And you wanted to speak on that a little bit.
Absolutely. But I also just want to speak on your comment that it might be too late to fix it and let you know that it's not too late. We're just getting started with all this, you know, what's going on in education. And we're hoping that this is like a bump in the road and not like a fundamental altering change to public education. At least that's what I'm hoping, but I don't feel like it's too late. I feel like this year is really the ground zero or testing ground for how things can be.
That's kind of what I meant. Like I was more referring to like we can't allow it to just be a situation where we throw our hands up, you know. But
no, we got to work hard and we got to figure out creative solutions for sure, and we got to be more creative than what's been some of the solutions for the Wi-Fi issue, because my understanding from what I heard is that certain districts were doing things like parking buses with routers in parking lots and saying, if you don't have internet, come to these parking lots to do your homework. And I just find that that line of thinking is just flawed in a lot of ways. That's not equity. I mean, how many kids or families want to take kids? I mean, if you don't have internet, you probably have working parents, right, who are working in the day. So how are they going to drive you to the parking lot? Then we talk about stigmatizing, like in schools, you're not allowed to openly talk about which students get free lunch. You know, and you're not supposed, even teachers usually, unless you're like a life skills teacher like me, and you need to know that because you're helping kids navigate their accounts. Most teachers aren't even supposed to know like which students are on free lunch, but it's okay to send students to do their homework in a parking lot so that everyone knows they don't have internet. Like that doesn't seem very equitable. In other districts, they're handing out hotspots, but they ran out. So there was big delays on the Wi-Fi hotspots. So not everyone got the computers at the same time. And then like, there's been all sorts of issues. They have an online survey to ask whether or not you have internet access.
Oh, man. Yeah.
So I'm calling students in life skills and their parents, and I'm like, hey, do you need a laptop? And they're like, oh, probably, or even convince people. It's like, well, I have one laptop, but how many kids do you have? And do you use the laptop yourself for work? Well, yeah, I got 3 kids, 1 laptop, and I need that laptop for my work. So you still need to request 3 laptops. Or, you know, at least, you know, or at least 1 for, you know.
Yeah, it's just, it takes leadership, you know, it takes people like you. We need more people like you. I don't know how many are out there, you know, so the step up and see these problems and look at efficiency, you know, how can we do this efficiently? How can we think? How can we use logic? And yeah, that's really difficult. You know,
yeah, we do another thing logically that just I kind of wonder about is they did the survey in 4J, and my understanding is about 60% of the parents said they would probably keep their students home for the whole year. So, and then there's this big question, well, how do we provide the space for when we come back? So I think logically it's kind of like, what if you surveyed all the staff and figured out who wants to do online, who wants to teach in person, did the same thing with parents and try to match, like to like? Would we have half as many kids anyway?
Yeah. And I'm going to get to you in a little bit. Not only are you a teacher, you're also a husband and a father. So I want to get your personal take, kind of your personal perspective, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, as a teacher, you had just kind of touched on it, that there's kind of, they did a survey and it was kind of 50-50. Some wanted to do in-person classes. So you had spoke off air about, giving choice. The only thing I worry about is that there's like a guinea pig situation, and we're not just talking about Oregon or Lane County, because in Lane County, we're very fortunate that the numbers have been pretty low. It seems like a lot of people are taking COVID serious, wearing masks, social distancing, that kind of stuff. But what happens when a bunch of parents, for whatever reason, and it's up to them, and we'll get to that in a bit about personal perspective, what happens when they want to put their kids in school and the teachers want to teach, and then there's a massive outbreak? So
that's assuming that we wouldn't be able to have the precautions that are necessary, to prevent that. I mean, when we had a massive outbreak like this, I think it was in 1918, and they taught school outside. And I mean, so yeah, there could be, but what I'd like to see is the same precautions that we have like in a grocery store, or at least some, like what about putting up shields, or doing this for groups that are able to distance properly, providing the personal protective equipment, doing proper health screenings, checking temperatures of kids coming in and teachers coming. I think that there's measures that could be done that would prevent a massive outbreak.
Yeah, this is why we need to fund our schools, because it's been decimated through funding. People are like, oh, they've got enough. And yes, there's a waste in administrative costs, but this is yet another example of why we need funding, because all those plexiglass and all that stuff costs money. And I'm not trying to be like callous, oh, that's expensive, but the reality is there's only so much to go around, and so.
Yeah, luckily, I've heard that the governor, Kate Brown, did allocate some funding to where we're starting this school off with the same amount of funding that we started last school off. Whereas without that allocation, it would have been like 20% budget reduction almost, because of the loss of tax wages.
Right.
So, I mean, we're starting from where we were budget wise, I believe the same as last year, but we do have a lot of additional expenses, like those barriers cost money. As you say, teaching in two different models, costs money. Now we're going from one format to offering two different formats and allowing for more choice. Then yeah, we should be funding the schools better. And that's why last year on May 8th, or was the year before that, we had the Student Success Act rally, and that the teachers all had that day where we gathered and advocated for that act to pass, and it did pass. And ironically, the money from the Student Success Act was supposed to kick in, this fall. So had all of this coronavirus outbreak not happened, and we would be coming back to school with an actual increase that we were able to pass in Oregon, for a large part due to the volunteer and activism of thousands of teachers across the state, OEA, and everybody. So it should have been. It's you think about what could have been, and it would have been a really positive year instead.
Yeah, and it's just difficult because there's no. I mean, I don't want to say there's no way that we could have planned for this, because there definitely could have been. If there was more awareness, there's people that had the foresight to call it out as far back as 2006, where they were talking about this being a very real possibility, and we could get into pointing the fingers on the federal level, but we're not going to do that.
You don't want to talk about how the pandemic response team got cut like 2 years before the pandemic?
I mean, we can, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous that happened, because, there's so much out there that shows Obama was warning that this was coming, and it's not something that caught us off guard. Now, it is on the states too to do something, but like we talked about, there's just so much. I mean, states have to balance their budget. This is where the difference between the state and federal level. Just like us as citizens, we have to pay our bills at the end of every month. The federal government just prints new money, and they don't balance their budget. That's the issue. And unfortunately, there is no safe haven when it comes to the two-party system on who is going to balance their budget. Everybody says, oh, I like them because they're fiscally responsible. Well, where's that? I don't know if that actually exists on the federal level. So It's
Well, I
pretty.
think we're at the highest deficit we've ever had currently.
Oh, and it's just getting bigger, and yeah, it's really scary. I mean, like you said, it's there's so many heartbreaking things about what's happening across the board. But like you said, we had optimism to come into this new school year with funding that was fought for. And now we have a whole different slew of issues that I'm sure, and, I've been hearing across the country talks of strike, about teachers going on strike, and different things because of their frustrations. And we'll see. It's going to be challenging. Now, what are some of the ideas that you've had for altering distance learning? Now, you had mentioned about choice for parents, parents and teachers as well. What are some of the alternatives specifically for special needs students that you've thought would be beneficial in this COVID situation?
Well, at the very least, we need to think about our instructional assistants and how to retain them and how to make sure that they're able to support students in whatever ways are allowed. So we know, for example, that through developmental disability services that PSWs can, or personal support workers can serve students in the community and in their home. As a part of the special ed committee, we've met with the Oregon Department of Education multiple times and talked about their guidelines for ensuring equity during distance learning or during this kind of hybrid model. And they've talked about serving kids with the most significant impacts from disabilities in the school and just following all the same types of protocols that DDS follows, like maybe having, not switching people around like we normally. I try to have all my instructional assistants work with the majority of kids and we switch on the hour or every couple hours. But during this situation, you'd probably just be keeping them paired up like one IA to one kid if you could. But I mean, if we're not, we could be bringing them into the school according to the ODE guidelines and just practicing proper distancing and screening. We could be supporting our IAs to sign up with DDS. We could be doing community instruction. I think for all kids, not special ed, we ought to be sending hands-on kits. Like there's all these different kits and packages. I think we should be sending kinesthetic learning materials to families in the mail. And I think that we should, so that if I'm as a teacher is leading a Zoom session, then I should be like, okay, get out your materials and we're going to build this thing together or whatever it may be. But we need to get hands-on learning even in a distance model. I mean, and we also need to think about the fact that it's not healthy for our kids to be staring at screens all day.
Right.
And that before this pandemic hit, it was all about, limiting the screens. Now my kids want to play, Roblox or Minecraft with their friends. And it's like, oh, good, they're socializing with their friends. But back before the pandemic hit, it was like 2 hour, 1 hour limit. And then, then you're working in the yard, and so that's kind of, that paradigm has shifted a little bit. And so I think that we ought to be mailing kids the book, like the hard copy book instead of expecting them to read hundreds of pages on a screen. I mean, just lots of different, I want to see innovation and creativity, and I don't want it to be, like it was in spring is a little bit explainable because it was not planned for, it was kind of emergency, but I feel like we're going in the fall and I haven't heard a big improvement in the planning. I'd like to see some real leadership from administration. At the very least, give me a list of what I can potentially offer to kids.
Right. Now,
and then the way we did our SPED paperwork was interesting too, because a lot of districts said that you had to have an IEP meeting and completely rewrite the IEP to accommodate for distance learning, and that's absolutely ridiculous. Like imagine
what's IEP?
That's an individual education program. So for kids on an IEP, that sets the goals that they're going to work on for the whole year. It has a variety of goals that, educating the whole child is usually strength-based, because we're not trying to have a lot of power struggles. And, with students with disabilities, we really want to expand areas of strength, especially for kids with developmental disabilities who are older. And that's just like it's a team of whoever's supporting the students. Specialists are a part of the team, parents are a part of the team, teacher, and the student is a part of the team, and they get to talk about the goals that they want to achieve. And it's just basically a process where we're putting out the annual goals, and they usually align to alternative achievement standards. And it's setting what we're working on for the whole year.
Right.
So the idea that you would take that plan and redo it to fit in a disaster or emergency type of situation is problematic on a lot of levels. Like a lot of parents don't want to change their whole student's plan. I mean, you'd be taking off on some cases 3/4 of a kid's IEP, and they know that that's not what their kids need. So it just puts us in a really weird negotiating spot, and it's also a lot of paperwork. So what we did instead, in the spring, we looked at every option we could provide, which back then was, we'll send you mail-in packets, we'll support you through online instruction in Google Classroom, and we'll do video instruction. What do you want? Do you want mail-in only? Do you want online only? Do you want both? Do you want neither? And we would call and just talk this out with each set of parents or parent or guardian. And based on what we agreed on that conversation, we would send them a prior written notice, which is something that you have to send at the end of any change that happens in a special ed system. You have to send what's called a PWN, or a prior written notice. And that is something that informs them that we're changing the program in the ways that we discussed. So ours just said, due to the pandemic and distance learning being mandated by the governor, we're going to serve your student on these goals in this way. We're not going to work on these goals because it's not necessarily possible.
Right.
And just have it aligned to what the parents want. But like a prior written notice is 1 or 2 pages. An IEP and life skills can be 30 pages. So that's the difference. Wow. And I don't think anybody in a pandemic really wants the teachers to be focused on paperwork compliance rather than helping the family and the kid.
Right, exactly.
You can't do both. There's only so many hours in the day.
And that's something I wanted to touch on before I get into kind of your personal perspective as a parent. For teachers, expectations for teachers. I mean, are teachers expected to do more now than ever? And do you feel that there is a sense of leadership, at least, that's kind of guiding everybody, or are teachers kind of out on their own?
It's a little bit of a mix, but in Oregon, it's really interesting. Like ODE puts out these guidelines and says, it's like, you could do this, or you could do this. But if these 2 things are not possible, you don't have to do any of them. It's like, that's kind of how the guidelines go. And then the guidelines say, they don't tell you who's responsible for making the decisions of what is and what isn't possible. And so they're not, in other states, I've heard like the Department of Education is very strict, like, we're doing this, everybody get on the same page.
Right.
But in Oregon, it's more like everyone has their little special ed kingdoms. It's like Game of Thrones and special ed, and so you don't really know what all the districts have a lot of flexibility. It's not clear who's making the critical decisions. And based on the quality of the administrators that you have, you might get a lot of support, or you might get basically no support. So.
Right, which is a trade-off, because I know that sometimes unconventional methods can be beneficial. And so when you're not handcuffed to a certain style of curriculum, I'm sure that there's benefits. But in this situation, a one-size-fits-all approach, well, that never works, but a one-size-fits-all. But when there's just guidance, I think it's really beneficial. So I wanted to talk to you as a father, your parents' perspective. I want to make sure that we at least comment on how this is a really difficult time. It's really confusing. There's a lot of misinformation coming from every angle on the science of this. There's a lot of people that are doubting it with the, COVID and the coronavirus. What is your personal opinion on if you would want to send your kids to school?
I would want to, it's not just my personal opinion, because I've been married for the last 14 years. So it's a collaborative decision, which is in some respects a lot harder than if you just are making the decision on your own, but maybe it's not. But, me personally, it's kind of ironic. Like, my kids are pretty healthy. I make sure that they exercise. Like, we believe that if you even start to get looking a little sick, like a cough or a runny nose, we cut out all the sugar and load heavy on vegetables. We believe food is medicine to an extent. Like, my son had perfect attendance. It's kind of ironic. He had perfect attendance in school until distance learning, and then he tried to get away with not doing math, and he got marked absent in 1 out of 6 classes for a week. So, distance learning ruined my kid's perfect attendance streak. Not like that matters, but
Sure.
I just think it's kind of funny. But I think my kids being 8 and 12, and I think it should be that they should have input on the decision. And I've talked to both of them, and they would go back. They would like to go back as, with precautions. Both my kids wear masks and are pretty good about washing their hands. And, what I don't want to see is, I don't want to see education fundamentally and permanently altered to be less equitable forevermore,
right. So but my
wife might have different opinions. So, ultimately it's a team decision of our family, and we're going to respect everybody's opinion. If it was up to me and hybrid learning became an option, and my kids wanted to go back, I want to support them to be brave. I don't want to teach my kids to live in total fear. You know, I've seen some of my friends, you know, and their kids are really freaked out. And parents are handling it differently. I've had, you know, I believe in kind of a pod theory, so I would let my friends hang out with certain kid of their friends. I know I shouldn't probably say that. I'll get all sorts of people hating.
No, that's how I do it too. You know, there's a select group of people that we're just like, we're going to mitigate the risks, and these are going to be our quarantine friends, you know, because I think that you'll go crazy otherwise. And you just have to know, you have to understand, you can't deny risks, you know. I mean, people are doing that, but that's a whole different issue. No, I agree. I want to touch on this just real quick. I have a ton of respect for you, Niels, because I went through, when I was looking, I make a flyer for every episode, and usually I just take a picture where there's enough room to put some text around it of the individual I'm interviewing. I could not find a picture of just you. Every single picture you have is with your kids, which I'm not going to put on for security reasons, your wife, you know, and I just thought out of their privacy, I wasn't going to put a plastered picture of them. But it's a pretty cool thing, and it's pretty telling that what matters to you isn't just, like you had mentioned, it's a team effort. You got to come to that conclusion. And it's pretty cool to see somebody that is a husband and a father before anything else. And so I just want to touch on that I thought that was pretty neat, because most people's Facebook pages, including myself, have a ton of pictures of themselves, and people navigate that differently because of privacy. You know, I mean, I'm friends with so many people on Facebook that I'm like, they don't need to know my family. You know,
I'm okay with you using a picture of my wife and I'm sure she wouldn't mind, you know.
I got a good one, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that, you know, and it's cool to hear you say that about, you know, well, this isn't just my decision, you know, and I hope people are, you know, the benefit of being with somebody, having a life partner, is that you can bounce ideas, and it's not all on you also, you know, that you can actually have some feedback and to make that decision. But yeah, there's a lot of parents out there that like you said, are freaked out, and
the kids are freaked out. The kids are super freaked out. Like, I've been around, you know, there's certain kids. I even work with a kid, you know, I have students who I've heard who have autism, and, you know, if they go out and someone's within 10 feet of them, they start screaming murderer and run away. I mean, there's kids that are really freaked out. There's parents that are really freaked out. There's families that don't allow their kids to hang out with anybody at all. And, you know, and that's their choice, but I that's not the choice that I'm going to make for my family, because I don't want to teach them that level of fear. Reasonable precautions. I don't think that, so I'm in favor of mask, you know, mandate in the store and community indoor public spaces, and, you know, but I'm not in favor of like mandating masks when we're hiking outside. You know, I think you kind of step off the trail, hold your breath, but to me, that's kind of a line, you know, for me. But
yeah, I've read some stuff, and I'm sure it's scare tactics, but I've read some stuff about, you know, the trade-off. It's like, we can send our kids back to school, but then we're going to have to wear masks at home. And we just know that's not happening. You know, I'm just like, that's ridiculous. I mean, I don't know.
They don't have any authority to regulate what you do or don't do inside your own home, you know, unless you're harming someone else. And I think that it's a stretch to say that not wearing a mask in your own home is harming someone else. And I don't think that I don't even know if that's factual information or if that's scare tactics.
Yeah. And there's a ton of.
Go ahead. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, you know, touch back on, you know, being married for the last, you know, 15 years almost, and that, you know, I talk to a lot of students in the high school because I have peer tutors who come into. We started a peer tutoring program as a part of life skills. So every period I might have 3 to 5 peer tutors coming in who also help me do the work in a normal situation and who learn about special ed. And sometimes they ask me about relationships, or they ask me if I have any advice for them. So I just wanted to tell you that what I tell them is, you know, marriage is a lot about compromise, but if your partner is trying to get you to do something that you hate, that's not compromise, that's capitulation. And you don't have to do things you hate. You should never have to do anything you hate to make your partner happy. And that's kind of a good warning that the relationship is abusive.
Sure. And that goes both ways. I mean, if you're telling somebody that you want something out of them and they're just not feeling it and you're forcing it on them, then you got to have that presence of mind to know, it's like, what kind of person am I being to this person? You know, if I'm making them do it. But yeah, that's a good That's a good thing to teach to young people, especially, you know, to have enough, to look out for themselves enough that they're not just people pleasing constantly. I know I've been guilty of that, and I've been on both sides of that, you know, but yeah. So Nels, it's really cool talking to you. I'm inspired by the work that you do and the passion that you have for it. One of the things that you've done in the past, and I look forward to seeing your posts again about, you'll leave extra tickets because you'll invite, every couple times a year, you'll invite all the kids to go to a basketball game, you know, an Oregon Ducks basketball game or a football game. And sometimes kids can't make it, different things. And so you'll have extra seats. And that's one thing I always see on your Facebook feed is the posts like, hey, there's some extra tickets if you want to come sit with us. And that's a bummer that that's not happening this year. So hopefully basketball, I think the Pac-12 football is canceled. I know that, but I think basketball, they're just postponing it till 2021 as of right now. So it could still happen, but
yeah, I don't know how many people we had about 300 people at the last year's basketball game. I have a friend who runs he works in the ticket office and he's really high up. So he's helped me connect with the U of O and they donate. Usually the youth groups for football donate 20 youth tickets and 5 chaperones. So we've done a football game almost every year for the last, 10 years. And then the basketball game has grown every year. We started with like 30, 40 people and up to about 300 last year. So just, and for people with disabilities and their families and people who work in special education and their families.
It's a pretty big event. Yeah.
I think because going to a sporting event is a good life skill, and it's something that we've had kids who were terrified of going to a game, and then they go to a game and it becomes their favorite thing ever. And that's also, life changing for someone. If you figure out, the more things you figure out you like that you didn't know you liked, just the more enriched your life becomes.
Sure.
And really, if you like sports and you follow sports, that's something that, because a lot of times people that I work with, or almost all the students I work with, have some kind of communication deficit, and they struggle with coming up with what to talk with other people about. Yeah. So, if you like the Trailblazers, all of a sudden, we got something in common that we can talk about. We can talk about that 1-point victory yesterday, and
you had to throw it in. No,
throw it in.
And that's so true. I mean, I'm a huge sports fan, so I've done things in different capacities. My high school job was working at the Eugene M's games, and I've always known there was people with special needs of all ages that were passionate about the M's, would know every stat, every player. And I think that it's so beneficial. And so there's just so much that's heartbreaking about what's going on right now, because being a part of that team, as a fan, but some of them have kind of roles, there was employees that worked that were special needs that were awesome, brought a lot to the table, and I just can't wait to have that back. The community feel, it's going to really devastate our community not having the Oregon Duck football games. And a lot of the work, good friend of mine, he has cerebral palsy. He's worked security at the games, and it's fulfilling for him because he is on disability. He can't work a lot, but he can work a few days a year, and it gives him a real sense of pride, So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be hard this year, but we're all kind of having to band together and remember that we're not in this alone, so.
Absolutely. Like a week ago, one of my students former students who's like 25, 26 now, called me randomly. He'll call me like 3 times a year. So he calls me, he's like, there's no football. Did you hear? No football game for you not take your students. And I'm like, yeah, it's all right, man. Next year. And he's like, will there be basketball? I want to go. And I'm like, I always invite him, because I invite students who age out too and their families. He's like, but I am worried there'll be no basketball. And it's like, this is the kid who had major behavior, like anger issues. And I'm like, yes, but it's nothing to get upset about,
Sure.
Stay calm. So here I am like 7 years later, still like talking to the kids. And
I mean, I get pretty upset if there's no basketball, so I can relate to him. I can relate to him. So
I got a kid yelling, I got an adult with disabilities yelling at me about no basketball on the phone, but it's all love. So
right. Well, I appreciate the work you do, Nels. You're a pretty inspirational guy. It's pretty cool to see how far you've came. We met when we were probably in probably 2021, so we've known each other for quite a few years now, and it's cool to see the man that you've became. I'm going to end this with a song, and I want to touch on it a little bit about why I chose it. So this is a song by my buddy Joey Helpish of Dandyland Studios, and it's kind of funny, colorful. I wouldn't say colorful language. It's a goofy song. He does a project. Joey is very open about how he is on the spectrum, and he works with a lot of different young people with autism and on the spectrum with disability, special needs, to teach them music and writing. And so one of the things he does is he works with young kids where he does songwriting workshops. Well, he'll record the song, but they kind of help him, and he shows them through remotely now, but through screen sharing, kind of the apps like on an iPad, and teaches people of all ages how to write music for themselves. Well, one of the cool things about Joey, and I think you would relate to this to an extent, Joey is actually very unconventional. So he'll challenge the way that the norms and the way that he goes about things. So he's willing to have young people kind of help him write the lyrics. And when he's working with people that are 5, 6, 7 years old, of course, their favorite word is poop. So the song that he wrote, and I thought it was pretty fitting, is called "Why Is Coronavirus Pooping on My Life?" or "Why Did Coronavirus Poop on My Life?" And so it's pretty funny, and so I thought I would play that. So if you're interested, you can look up Dandyland Studios on Facebook, and I will put in the show notes for this the link to his Facebook page. And Joey Helpish is his name, and you can look and follow him on Facebook as well. He does some great stuff, so I thought it was a good song to pick for the end of this. Niels Pasternak, I really appreciate you. Thank you for sharing some of your thoughts on this, and keep up the good work. I know this is going to be a challenging year, and then, like you said, this is the beginning. This is ground zero. So as far as what the future holds for education, I know that you're vehemently against going more and more and more into a distance learning only approach. I think that's a terrible approach, and so we'll have you back on in the future, and we'll talk about what the future holds for education and what kind of awareness we can raise so that people see the benefits of funding it. We have to just remember that we need to kind of work on the administrative costs, but we also
need to work on some of the administrative philosophies. I don't know if I told you, but I got my administrative license and I'd worked as an administrator a couple summers. And in the program of being an administrator where I was learning, there was this book that they're touting called From Good to Great. And the quote from the book is, some administrators, like, I wanted my teachers to be excellent. So when a very good teacher came up for tenure, I denied them because they just weren't great enough. And that's like taught to us as a good philosophy of an administrator. I don't know. I think if you're good at your job, you deserve security. I think that kind of attitude's really flawed. And that's one of the reasons, but there's a lot of reasons why, even though I got my administrative license, I decided to stay as a teacher because I just don't adhere to some of the administrative philosophies that we have.
Well, we need more people. We need more people in the top levels that are making the decisions with the teacher's best interest in mind. So maybe down the road, that'll be something that you want to get into. But yeah, so we'll have a lot more to talk about. We'll have you on again down the road. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you a lot. Thanks for doing this, Nels. So this is Joey Helpish of Dandyland Studios with "Why Did Coronavirus Poop on My Life?"
Stubborn virus, I put it all to an end. I wanna give it the Atlas curse. I'm sick of it being mean. I just wanna go see some new stuff that I've never seen. Why, oh, why did coronavirus poop on my life? crush it with a rock. Send it to space like a comet. TMS to COVID-19. Go back to Penguin Academy. Stop ruining my life. Stop messing with me. Why, oh, why did coronavirus poop on my life? Why, oh, why did coronavirus poop on my life? I hope you die, coronavirus. I hope you die, coronavirus. I hope you